Let's start with a short quiz. Just 3 questions, and to each of these you'll answer hardly ever, some of the time, or often. Here's the first one. How often do you feel that you lack companionship? Hardly ever, some of the time, or often. How often do you feel left out of things? Hardly ever, some of the time, often. And how often do you feel isolated from others? Again, hardly ever, some of the time, often. In 2023, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services declared an epidemic of loneliness, along with a national strategy to increase social connection. Very strong and urgent agenda. And this is because the stats on how loneliness impacts health outcomes are actually quite sobering. So I'll give you a few. If you are frequently lonely, there's a 29% higher risk of heart disease, a 32% greater risk of stroke, a 50% higher risk of developing dementia if you're older, and it raises the risk of premature death by 60%. So you know how sitting is the new smoking. It turns out loneliness is also the new smoking. Here's the other thing. It appears that 52% of Americans are lonely. Loneliness skyrocketed after the first wave of COVID, and there's probably no surprises there. We completely tampered with just about everything that holds society together. Like a lot of other social ills, though, it was on the rise for about 2 decades before this, and then COVID amplified it. Now, those brief questions we answered are the UCLA 3-item indirect measure of loneliness. And these are used in surveys to see how much loneliness is being experienced in a population at any given point. Why indirect questions? There's a few empirical reasons around validity, but really it's also because, 1, people often aren't aware that they're lonely, that that's what they're experiencing, and they typically will refer to it as something else. Boredom, tiredness, low mood, right? And 2, because something we've also highlighted before, many people feel slightly ashamed of being lonely. So it can actually be really hard to tell if someone's lonely because they don't know if they are, and also then because they try to hide it. Okay, we're going to be spotlighting this topic a lot more, and there are a lot of different types of loneliness, by the way. For now, though, do you think you might know someone who is lonely? Given that 52% of people are, you probably do. Here are a few signs someone could be lonely. They seem to be pulling away from people more. They might be less aware of self-care, their appearance, that kind of thing. They could be extremely talkative. It could be hard to wrap up a conversation with them, you know? Maybe they get a little bit deflated when the conversation is over, right? We know there was one qualitative study where one woman said she goes days and days without hearing the sound of her own voice. Okay, so let's be generous with our listening, certainly with anyone who's young or old and living on their own. And sometimes if people are getting sick a lot, maybe not bouncing back, that can be a sign. And sometimes if they're getting critical of others or of themselves or a little bit cynical. These are all things that you can look for. And next we're going to be talking about how to support someone who might be lonely.